Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, you just drew a Montana elk tag, and what you do next will decide whether this hunt comes together or completely falls apart. Because here's the reality. Most elk hunters don't fail in Montana because there aren't elk, right? They fail because they show up with a loose plan. They might hunt hard for a few days and then start reacting when things don't go the way they expected. Maybe pressure hits or elk shift. Access gets crowded, and instead of adjusting with purpose, they start guessing. I've seen it for over 30 years. The hunters who find success in Montana aren't just working harder, they show up already understanding how they're going to operate when things change. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I would build a real plan for your Montana hunt. Not just generic advice, but what actually helps you step into Montana with clarity, structure, and confidence. The moment you draw that Montana tag, your hunt has already started, whether you realize it or not. Most guys celebrate, maybe tell a few buddies, start thinking about gear, and then nothing really happens for a while. They stall out. Weeks go by, sometimes months, and they tell themselves they'll get serious about it once summer hits. And I think that's a mistake. The first 30 days after you draw are some of the most important you'll have. This is when you should be locking things in, not delaying them. So start with your hunt dates. Be honest about what part of the season you're actually committing to, archery, rifle, or even the shoulder season, and understand what that means. Early season elk behave differently than rifle season elk. Pressure, weather, and movement all change depending on timing. If you don't define that early, everything else you build is really just guesswork. This isn't about doing everything at once. It's about starting with clarity and direction instead of drifting into the season unprepared. Because the truth here is that you don't lose a Montana elk hunt in October. You lose it in the months beforehand. The biggest mistake you can make right now is thinking you're preparing for Montana. I don't really think you are. Montana isn't one hunt. It's a completely different experience depending on where you are, right? Western Montana can be dark timber, steep ground, deadfall, and limited visibility. Other areas are breaks country, river systems, or even agricultural edges where elk behavior looks completely different than those other areas. If you treat it all the same, you're going to prepare wrong. The shift you need to make is this. Your hunt is one specific type of elk system, and everything you do from here on out needs to match that. You need to figure out what kind of country you're actually dealing with. Is this a timber hunt where you'll rarely see more than 80 yards, or is it more open where glassing becomes a major advantage? Is elk movement driven by elevation and seasonal change, or is it primarily controlled by pressure and access? Those answers change how you scout, how you move, and how you hunt, and how you prepare. If you're preparing for Montana, you're already behind. You need to prepare for your exact type of country. So before you get caught up in terrain, elevation, or even elk numbers, you need to understand one thing. Access is going to dictate your entire hunt. Roads mean pressure, not just a little bit. Consistent, predictable pressure. The closer you are to a road, the more likely elk are already adjusting to human movement. Trailheads are even worse. They concentrate hunters into the same drainages, the same ridges, and the same basins. Now layer in private land. In a lot of Montana units, elk use private as sanctuary. They feed there, move through it, or sit just off of it where pressure can't reach them the same way. If you don't recognize that dynamic, you're going to spend time hunting areas that look good but don't function well. So the question isn't how much land there is, it's how much of it you can actually hunt elk in effectively. Because elk don't care how big the map is, access determines everything. Most elk hunters go into a Montana hunt trying to pick the perfect spot before they ever step foot in the field. They want that one basin, that magic drainage, that one guaranteed area where elk are supposed to be. And that's not usually how this works. A better approach is to start with 3 to 5 solid zones that all make sense on paper, and then let the hunt tell you which ones are real. Your job early isn't to lock it in. It's to sort through all of these quickly. That means moving with purpose. You're not wandering, you're checking areas against reality. Is there fresh movement? Does the terrain actually hold elk the way you expected? Does the pressure level match what you planned for? If the answer is no, I'd move on. The biggest mistake is staying too long in a place that isn't producing, hoping it turns on. And that's how you're going to burn days on those precious hunts. You need clear reasons to eliminate an area. No current sign, poor structure, or pressure that doesn't align with elk behavior. Because the faster you eliminate the bad ground, the faster you get into elk. So speed comes from eliminating the bad stuff, not just guessing about your unit. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations in Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post-Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory, it's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. Pressure in Montana isn't a surprise, right? It's a guarantee. And if you're not planning for that before the season starts, you're already setting yourself up to be reacting to that pressure instead of actually hunting. Another note is that the rifle opener can shift elk almost overnight. Areas that felt quiet during archery can suddenly fill up with trucks, camps, and consistent movement. So resident pressure can spike fast, especially in accessible country. And even during archery, calling pressure builds pretty quickly in a lot of those well-known areas. What a lot of elk hunters do is wait until they feel that pressure and then they panic. They start moving without a plan or chasing quiet instead of understanding where elk actually went. And that's where things can fall apart. So instead, you need to pre-plan your response. Before you ever step into the field, you should know if pressure builds here, I'm going to go here. So you've got plan A, you know that if there's pressure there, you're going to go to plan B. That means having a primary area, a second option, and a fallback that all functions differently, whether that's elevation, terrain, or that access we were talking about. These aren't random backups, they're deliberate shifts based on how elk respond to the pressure, because you don't know that if you haven't been there before. Because if you wait to react to the pressure, you're already behind it. Now, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is expecting elk to behave the way you think they should instead of actually understanding how they will. And that's one of the biggest mistakes across all elk hunting, right? Not just Montana. Not all Montana elk are going to migrate. Some do, especially in areas with consistent snow-driven movement. But a lot of herds are more resident than people realize, and they shift based on pressure long before they move because of weather. So early season, elk are focused on feed and security. They're using predictable patterns, but they're still vulnerable to pressure. Once rifle season hits, everything's going to tighten up. Elk compress into thicker cover, harder terrain, and areas that give them an advantage. In the late season, that can bring weather-driven movement, but even then, it's not always a clean textbook migration. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it stalls, sometimes it never really happens the way you expected or at different elevations. And that's where most hunters get it wrong. They expect elk to follow a script, but elk don't follow our expectations. They follow pressure, weather, and survival. So if you can start thinking in those terms instead of assumptions or something that you read on a forum, you're going to stay more aligned with what's actually happening instead of constantly trying to catch up. One of the fastest ways to sabotage a Montana elk hunt is using the wrong approach for the country you're actually in. If you're in thick timber, this isn't a glassing game, right? You're not going to sit on a knob and pick elk apart from a distance. It becomes a movement and positioning hunt. You're working through terrain carefully, managing wind constantly, and being really patient enough to let things develop in tight cover. Open country is the opposite. You know, glassing becomes a major advantage. You can locate elk from a distance, study movement, and plan an approach before you ever commit. Wind discipline matters even more because you're exposed and mistakes can carry further. Then there's calling. In some areas, it can work. In others, especially with high pressure, it can hurt you more than help you. Knowing when to stay silent is just as important as knowing when to engage. The mistake a lot of elk hunters make is forcing one style into every situation. They hunt the way they prefer instead of the way the country actually demands. And that's why opportunities fall apart a lot of times, because bad strategy in the right place will still fail. So before you ever step into Montana, there are a few things that need to be completely dialed in, right? And this isn't about having the perfect setup. It's about being ready for the realities of the hunt. So physically, you need to be prepared for the terrain you're actually hunting. That means side hilling, navigating deadfall, and moving efficiently through uneven ground for long periods. Montana's going to wear you down if you're not ready for that kind of movement. Shooting is just as important. This isn't about how you shoot on the range after 5 arrows or a few practice rounds. It's about your cold shot, first opportunity, real conditions, real pressure. You need to know realistic distances in that kind of country and then stay with them. Gear needs to match Montana conditions as well. Wet mornings, cold starts, changing weather, hot afternoons. If your system isn't reliable, it's going to affect how you hunt. And mentally, you need to expect pressure and adjustments. Things are going to change. Elk are going to move. Plans are going to shift. Your confidence isn't going to come from hoping it works out. Confidence comes from preparation. You drew the tag. That part's done. Now the real work starts. Most elk hunters show up in Montana with a loose plan, thinking they're just going to figure it out once they get there. And for a few days, it might feel like it's coming together or you're out there hunting. But as soon as pressure builds or elk shift or conditions change, a lot of folks are forced into reaction mode. And that's when things start to unravel. Your serious, consistent elk hunters don't operate like that. They show up already knowing how they're going to adjust. They understand the country. They've planned for pressure, and they've built options in that allow them to stay in the hunt when things change. That's a big difference. Montana doesn't reward effort alone. It rewards preparation, discipline, and the ability to stay aligned with what's actually happening. You've got to know your country because Montana rewards the hunter who shows up ready for the country, for the elk behavior, not the one who's just hopeful. Now, if you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. If you want hands-on application and real-time breakdowns, we have an in-person Elk Camp 2026 that is built around this same philosophy: structure, preparation, and execution in real terrain. You can check out our Elk Camp at backboneunlimited.com. And if you want ongoing access And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.